Some of the first evidences that we have on paying taxes are dating from Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, where the citizens had to pay taxes in the form of grains, animals, or labor. Nowadays, many states are taking from our pockets as much as 70% of our money, or maybe even more in some cases, in the form of different taxes. Income tax, property and car tax, or VAT, which, even if not directly imposed on the buyer, still ends up in the final price. There are also the insurances and other excise taxes that are putting more pressure on the average citizen. Many of these states do not take proper care of their own citizens, do not manage what they collect in an honorable way, and do not pursue the interests of the people either in domestic affairs or internationally. International institutions with significant power, such as the European Union or the World Bank, pressure those states where they can afford to exert pressure, particularly those with large budget deficits. And due to the corruption at the top of these states, the pressures are again transferred onto ordinary citizens. The question is, why do we comply and why do we accept so much pressure? If you take to the streets in your countries to protest against the current corrupt politicians, do not let yourselves be manipulated by the opposing political powers that fight the current ones. Most of the time, they just want to take over power by taking advantage of favorable circumstances, specifically the fact that you have gathered in the streets, and steer you towards something else under the pretext that they are intervening to bring coherence, that every group needs a leader. Yes, we have seen so many revolutions turned around and manipulated, and the wishes of the people poisoned by other interest groups, that we must be extremely vigilant at such times. I'm not saying we need anarchy, but the only real advantage of ordinary people, of those who have been denied equal opportunities and who are under increasing pressure from modern states, is that we are more numerous. If we are foolish, that one advantage disappears, and those who already have generational wealth, along with new companies developing AI, will create inequalities that will become unbearable for the average person. And when I say average person, I also mean the middle class in many countries. Don't you think that just because you have a small managerial job in some multinational company, you're safe? Indeed, we are being bombarded continuously with information about how bad things will get in the coming years due to the direction humanity is heading. But already there are enough people who have lost their jobs because of artificial intelligence. Some will say, well, that's how it goes. If it does things faster and better than we do, it's natural that it takes our place. Others say this is just a phase we need to get through and resist, because eventually this new technology will allow us to have more time for ourselves. I'm only proposing that you think, when in all of human history has something noble that was promised or invented actually been implemented in the proposed or theoretical form? Let me also propose an imagination exercise. What could the world look like in the future? A dystopia like in sci-fi movies. But often in these films, we can observe behavioral patterns of those in power, and it's not hard to imagine that the world could again head toward dictatorial systems, where the gap between rich and poor widens enormously, and we return to how the world was 1,000 years ago, to feudalism, with lords and slavery, where if you weren't born into the right family, your chances for a good, prosperous, and peaceful future were often non-existent. So, if this huge shift is happening right before our eyes, do we still trust national governments and the new tech moguls that everything will be fine? Do we just sit back, uninvolved, and watch as generations of people who fought for justice and a more equal future for every human being on the planet or in their own country, end up having fought in vain for those ideals and beliefs? I am not inciting violent revolts. Violence hardly ever seems to bring anything good, and those in positions of power from the shadows change like chameleons into any new form we think might be good, if we are not vigilant. There are countless examples, you just have to search and not learn lies or remain indifferent. Revolt comes from within each of us and from truly becoming aware of what has happened so far and what frustrates each of us. Not driven by various NGOs or interest groups, which may turn out, even decades later, to have been corrupt themselves and fallen under the influence of those who rule from the shadows. If each of us would simultaneously refuse to accept more and more oppression and pressure from governments and global institutions, if we stopped enrolling in the armies and fighting wars for the fake ideals of the few, killing each other in the process, we would truly sound an alarm. We have international institutions like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, or EU, to name a few, who pressure corrupt governments to impose higher taxes after state budget deficits occur, again, having the burden falling on the citizens. Instead of standing in solidarity with citizens and educating them, they are told, "Why didn't you revolt against your political class?" Or, "It is necessary to strengthen our economy and credibility and to borrow at favorable interest rates." Or, "Why did you elect them? It's not easy for citizens to truly reform the state and not let themselves be manipulated by opposition forces, especially when opposing political forces are controlled from the same place, so that the cycle keeps repeating. Some create deficits and budget problems, only for the so-called reformers to come later and impose more taxes on us. Typically, if you have a job and a bit of stability, you no longer care about others, you become indifferent, and you don't want that fragile stability disturbed, no matter how evil the state you live in is. It won't be easy, and the pressure will grow. But united, I believe we can bring out what is most beautiful in humanity, leaving nations aside, and all the constructs meant to divide us. I think you can see how there are people you resonate more with in other countries across the planet. Nationalism is, in itself, a form of violence. Indeed, it is beautiful and important to know our past, to know where we come from, but I believe it's time to let go of all the stupid forms of separation, while still preserving our heritage and culture. Though truly, humans should not fear becoming nobody to be nothing. We are so terrified of not being able to identify with something, of not belonging somewhere, that life seems pointless otherwise, if you don't also get to be someone. It's normal, society was built that way. But now society is taking a sharp turn, and I think you feel too that now is the time for inner revolt. Some will say, for example, well, we no longer want Muslim immigrants in our country, because along with those who truly want to change their future and flee oppression, there also come extremists who create chaos in our societies. And I get it, just as I understand how hard it is, in a conflict that has lasted since the writing of the Old Testament until today, to convince people in those regions not to arm themselves and not to join the armies of their countries or of the confessions that dominate them ethnically. But can't you see how much religions, ethnicities, and nationalism divides us? Can't you see how much those who lead these currents profit from the global population being divided? Maybe you'll think that the Neanderthalians were also eliminated through natural selection by the Homo sapiens hybrid because they simply had better genes, were better adapted to all kind of different climates, and the sapiens could exert their power on them. But such ancient history is much easier to whitewash. How do we know that Neanderthals didn't also mix peacefully with Homo sapiens in many cases, leading to new subspecies of Homo sapiens that later adapted to the regions where they settled? I know there are many topics and I jump from one to another. There would have been many examples to give and many other issues to mention. But I tried to concentrate in a short time as possible the idea of inner rebellion and disobedience in the world current context. I'm curious, what do you think about what's happening? I know that many of you feel and live the oppression, understand that the violence has brought nothing good, and try not to let themselves be led by hatred. Before jumping in and calling me a hypocrite because I'm using an AI voiceover, I just want to say that I'm not proposing we stop using AI tools, even if these ones are also contributing to the job loss with the most affected industry yet, being the creative sector. But let's be honest, many of us already use them, and I don't think that's going to change, unless we lose access to electricity on a global scale. What I'm suggesting is that we think about how we can rebel and pressure our governments to actually do something useful and fair for all of us, but something that will make a real difference. Or do you think I'm wrong, and this is just another phase of natural selection? Who already has the money and capacity to adapt? Farewell. Who doesn't? Bye-bye.